Well, after a bit of a disappointing quick road trip through Anaheim and San Jose, it's time for the Jets to come home and face off against the Wild. Will the Jets come away with a win? Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we are chatting about the Jets and what should be a very big game against the Minnesota Wild. Winnipeg is still, as of right now, first in the NHL. But, a lot of teams are starting to catch up, and with the Jets' recent slide being 5-4-1 in their last 10, they're starting to, have that lead cut down a good bit. And I think Winnipeg in general just feels like it needs some kind of quality opponent to beat, right? A team that they can get back on track against and show that, the squad is better than what it's been the last month or so. Am I a little bit suspicious that they are? Yes. But I will say that the lineup that the Jets may be putting out has at least one change that could be of value to Winnipeg. So we'll chat about that in just a brief moment. But before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Now, the Jets are coming in against the Wild, and Minnesota has recently been a little up and down themselves. They're 5-5 in their last 10, and they've still got a really good record, right? They're only 3 points behind the Jets. They've got a game in hand, but that really hot start that kind of like Winnipeg really fueled their success has started to fade a little bit. What is interesting is that if you look at their road and home splits, they kind of have the inverse of the Jets. They're much better on the road than they are at home, which is a little odd. From what the first time the Jets really faced off against Minnesota this year, the first couple of games, what I think really stood out was that Minnesota seemed very fast. This is a team that played very up-tempo, that had really quick rush counters and stuff, and just looked a lot more dangerous than I'd remembered, which, for a Jets team that has faced off against a lot of teams that play, slower, lower blocks, are not as aggressive and maybe not as offensively ambitious, it was a big change of pace. Minnesota used to be a very defensive V sort of team, and this squad plays with a lot more urgency. So right now they're kind of going through a really tough stretch, and part of it is that they have a bit of an injury crisis. They are currently missing Joel Eriksson-Ek, Jacob Middleton, and Philip Gustafsson. So that probably has a reasonable amount to do with their recent record, and I think this is a good opportunity for the Jets to come away with a big home victory. Now, Winnipeg is going to be putting out the usual forward lineup, so that part I don't think is the meaningful change. On the back end, though, rather than Stanley Miller, we are finally getting Heinola Miller. This is not by choice. Logan Stanley blocked a shot against the Ducks, and apparently it's bad enough to where he's going to miss a couple of games. So Winnipeg is going to be down to Heinola Miller, but to be honest, this actually should be what they do, period. Heinola is a great option alongside Miller. That pairing in very limited minutes has had very strong results, honestly, among the strongest shot differentials of any third pairing combo they've tried. And, it's the one that to me gives them a little bit more insurance if Fleury and Pionk can't get things together, which seems to be the general theme. Fleury is doing his best, but I think we all kind of know he is probably a seventh defender in most teams, or at least, if he played alongside Miller, if you limit his minutes, that's probably where he'll be the most successful. Fleury Miller was actually not bad, pretty decent. So in that respect, I think, there's a role for Fleury to potentially play on this team. He's certainly better than Stanley. That I don't really have any questions about. It's just, how much better really? But that's where Heinola Miller kind of offers some intrigue. I think that this pairing has the real potential to be as good as, Winnipeg's best defensive pairing right now, just because I think their ability to get the puck out very quickly is going to be noticeable. That's typically what I've seen from them, is that they exit relatively fast. Their passing and sort of outlets and usage of good stretch passes is much more noticeable. And I feel like this is going to be a really important game for them to show off quite well, because, at this point, they're just looking for a reason to sit Heinola over Stanley because Heinola doesn't PK, but maybe the Jets can be given a reason to keep him in the lineup. So that will be something to watch out for. In terms of what the Wild have got, their lineup looks a little Frankenstein right now. On the first line, it's Kaprizov, Rossi, and Zuccarello, which is crazy to me that Rossi was still potentially being hinted as a trade target earlier. I have to imagine that Rossi is no longer on the board unless the Wild are just really dumb. Marco is a great player. I would be shocked if he ends up getting traded this year. I don't know why he was even being hinted as a trade target earlier this season, but hopefully, if you're a Wild fan, that part has passed. Second line, you've got Johansson, Gaudreau, and Boldy. This is, years ago, probably a really fun line. Nowadays, a little bit disconcerting. Gaudreau is not really a 2C. Marcus is certainly not a top 6 player like he used to be, but at least Boldy is pretty sick. So in that respect, maybe they can make something happen. On the third line, you've got Foligno, Kuzhnutinov, and Hartman, which is actually a very Minnesota line. Lots of physicality, lots of suspension-worthy hits. Kuzhnutinov has been pretty decent, so certainly a line that could be a problem if Winnipeg ends up getting bullied and starts getting pinned in its own back end. On the fourth line, you've got Shore, Gauntz, and Jones. I feel like this is a really bad fourth line and one the Jets could probably take advantage of. That said, the Jets' depth lines haven't exactly been able to push the pace recently, so we'll have to see how they do. On the back end, they've got Brodin and Faber, Chisholm and Spurgeon, and Dermott and Bogosian. I feel like this is generally the healthiest this blue line has been. I forget if it was Brodin or Spurgeon that was missing for a good chunk of the opening of the season, but this is finally the Wild defense that you'd expect. And seeing Chisholm on the second pairing alongside Spurgeon does burn just a little bit. Right now, it would have been nice to have Declan. Also, don't look at how Jonathan Kovacevic is doing with the New Jersey Devils. That will also hurt a lot. But in terms of how this blue line matches up against the Jets, to me, it's better. But, that's all sort of speculative at this point. I think the bigger problem for Minnesota is that in net, they're really leaning on Fleury and Wallstedt. Now, Wallstedt's really good and a fantastic prospect, and quite honestly, one of the best goaltending prospects we've ever really seen. But by the same token, they're probably going to lean on the veteran in Fleury. And I think in that respect, the Jets should have a huge advantage, especially if Hellebuck starts. So crossing your fingers that the Jets come away with a big win. Yakov Trenin was day-to-day, and I don't know if he's healthy enough to potentially get inserted into Minnesota's middle six. He could be a difference maker if he goes in over somebody like Shore or Jones. But other than that, on paper, the Jets do have a 3-line advantage to a point. But the problem is Kaprizov and Rossi are really good and could upset that balance. So it's going to be a tight game. We saw last time that, the scoreline was 4-1 in favor of the Jets, but I think the actual game itself was a lot closer. So that's kind of what I'm expecting. Now, you'll see the next little segment here is talking about what is this team really, right? You're coming up against a really good playoff team in the Minnesota Wild, and you're trying to figure out what exactly the Jets are. And I'm still wrestling with this myself. I think I have a fairly good perspective, but I think the next couple of months, as the Jets try and make some adjustments and swaps, could really go a long way to either assuaging my doubts or making things much, much worse. So we'll chat about that in just a brief moment. But before we go too much further, wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at PrizePicks. If you love sports, you're going to love PrizePicks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your other favorite sports, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the action. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money with PrizePicks. And plus, this holiday season, they're even giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as little as 15 minutes. This week on PrizePicks, I'm eyeing the hockey board. I'm looking at Josh Morrissey for 2 points. I would go more than on that one, and probably more than 2 shots on goal. I feel like he tends to get at least a couple of attempts somewhere in the vicinity of the net, usually every couple of games. So I feel like that's a pretty good lineup choice. Might also be time for Mark Scheifele to get on the board. Maybe a goal or an assist, more than that. Probably over 1 is my guess. But the only way that you can do this is to download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. PrizePicks. Run your game. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about some interesting stuff with Winnipeg. And I guess the bigger question for the Jets is, what is this team, right? And I think Winnipeg is, on the one hand, a good team on the whole, but on the other hand, the way that they're kind of built doesn't really feel conducive to a deep playoff run. It's a problem that they've had for the last several years where they do kind of show pretty well in the regular season, and on the whole, if you look at an 82-game sample, there's more to like in like the broad scheme of things. But then there are a couple of big red flags that once you get to the playoffs really show up against a top-end team, or at least a squad that has a lot of speed. You know, last year's Colorado team wasn't really that great on the whole, but their speed just gave the Jets absolute fits. And whatever Winnipeg had happened between the end of the regular season and the beginning of the playoffs against the same team, it was just a totally different experience, right? And Colorado just started skating circles around the Jets. It was pretty ugly, but we did sort of worry that speed might be a problem for the team. And it definitely was. So this year's team isn't quite as slow. There's more foot speed. I think the Jets in general handle speed a bit better. But one thing that I've noticed with this team is that the forecheck still tends to be really difficult for them to handle. It just seems like if a team has enough pressure and speed, the Jets tend to make a lot of mistakes, whether it's passing from out the back, turning it over with some sloppy decisions, or just struggling to maintain a good pace. And I think it's especially noticeable if they've been traveling a lot, or if they have at least a little bit of fatigue. An opponent tends to get the first step on them pretty rapidly. You know, the Ducks game last night or the night before, I think is a pretty good indicator of some stuff that was a little frustrating. And, you know, for the Jets, if you're looking at teams outside of Winnipeg that are going to give them trouble, you know, if the Ducks are even causing you problems, it's probably not a great sign that you're getting outworked by a rebuilder. Now, that's not to say that the Jets can't improve things. I do think Winnipeg has lots of opportunities to potentially upgrade the squad, and you know there are even potential internal upgrades that could help this team in the long run. But I think for the Jets, trying to figure this stuff out, you know, before the trade deadline would be really ideal. And the good news this year is that there's a lot of trade targets. I think Winnipeg could really improve the squad and really transform the way it plays with maybe even just as little as 1 or 2 trades. So I'm not like hitting the panic button in that respect, but I will say that for the meantime, Winnipeg is a very bad 5v5 team. Right now, they're at the bottom of the league in terms of 5v5 production, goal scoring, chances conceded, chances created. And so, you know, the PK is starting to decline. And it just looks like the team is really powered by goaltending and the power play. And that is principally what's happening right now. I don't really expect that to necessarily last the entire year. And one of the biggest absences for the Jets is Dylan Sandberg. When he was in the lineup, this team generally played a lot better. It still wasn't perfect, but it was a lot less problematic, partly because Fleury-Pionk wasn't happening, and instead Sandberg-Pionk was a fantastic pairing, actually Winnipeg's best pairing. And it's probably why the Jets are maybe thinking that they should re-sign Neil Pionk. Now, I like Pionk as a person, and I think that he does bring, alongside the right pairing partner, some very good offensive production. But I think on the whole, the fact that you really have to have him against or alongside Sandberg just tells me it's probably not where you want to sink like $6 million. I think the Jets will improve a lot once Sandberg comes back, but I feel like you don't want to rely upon one player to fix your whole team. And Ehlers coming back will also help, but I don't think Ehlers is the only thing that this team needs in order to get their 5v5 game on track. The power play, again, you get a power play or overtime or something, and the Jets have generally been very good. But when it's even strength, it just hasn't really been a strong suit for the Jets. And it feels like Winnipeg's top six, bottom six mantra is continually a problem. The Jets don't really use a top nine model, and I don't really understand why that is. I think that they, in their minds, do that, but the way that the talent is actually arranged, I don't see it. The top two lines are your skill scoring lines, and your third and fourth lines are your fourth checking energy lines. And I feel like Winnipeg kind of does itself a disservice by not working the talent out a little bit more into a three-line arrangement of scoring skill, because I feel like the Lowry line could actually generate more offense and get more payoffs if you change up how they're maybe arranged. And I know that people will say, well, they're never touching that line and it's too good to tamper with. And if you actually look at how the Lowry line has played the last month or so, they're starting to slow down a lot. The defensive work has taken a bit of a hit. Their ability to crash the crease and attack the slot has declined significantly. They're not catching up as much and able to counter as effectively as they were. And in fact, I've mentioned it before, but I think the Jets are asking just way too much for that particular unit. So Winnipeg honestly needs to just rethink how they're creating offense. I think that this team has enough pieces on paper right now to be better than this, but it does require some really challenging decisions. And I think, the second skill line is one where, I would probably look at trying Cole Perfetti at center again. I know the team does not want to do this. I am almost certain that they will not. I think they would probably prefer to trade for a center instead. But the reality is, like, you've just got to get Nemesnikov away from center. Vlad is killing a lot of the offense that any one of Perfetti or Ehlers or Shibrikov creates, and it's not intentional. I just think he's slowing down a lot. Vlad used to be a more versatile two-way player. He was as of last year, but this year he's not been the same guy. And so for the Jets, you've got to find a way to really improve upon that position, because if your whole thing is that you have Connor Scheifele and Velarde as your first line, well, you'd better hope your second line is able to keep up. And so far, they've only been able to do that in some little spurts. So for the Jets, that whole top six model is already not working. And then you have to rely on your third and fourth lines to carry the rest of the offense. And to me, it just doesn't really seem like a particularly sustainable model. Maybe the Jets have some internal stats tracking or something that tells them that this team is working better than it is. But I don't know, man. Just even watching this team visually, to me, it's looking pretty rough. I wouldn't normally, say all of this if I didn't think this team was likely to turn things around over a longer stretch. I think this team is kind of in a tough spot. I don't think that this stuff that they're kind of struggling with is really going to just magically improve. And so for the Jets, I think they have a lot of work to do. But I will say that, maybe why I'm so hard on this team is because I really do think they're closer than they look to being really good. This squad, with a couple of changes, maybe some adjustments and swaps, could be a fantastic team. I still believe that, this team's ultimate destiny is much better than this, and it's going to require some hard decisions, some tough conversations, and a really good either pre-trade or trade deadline. One of those two, whether they do it early or later in the season. I think Winnipeg could absolutely really turn their fortunes around and be a much, much better team. But again, it's going to require some tough decisions. Connor Scheifele, Velarde, do you really want to live with that? Do you see Perfetti as a winger the whole time? What is ultimately your vision for this team? Are you willing to adjust how your first three lines work? Can you bring in some speed? Speed would be a huge blessing for this team, because right now, you still do kind of notice some lack of foot speed, and that's especially apparent with the defense right now. So hopefully the Jets come away with at least some level of understanding of how to turn this team around. Again, I think that they are closer than they appear, but getting to the point of turning the squad around into something really good, remains a little bit of a tricky situation. So we'll chat about that in just a little bit. But one particular name that's come up as of the last, I'd say, 48 hours, and who could be the exact kind of player that would absolutely transform this franchise is Elias Pettersson. And, for a lot of folks, I think there is some suspicion as to whether or not you would want to trade for a guy like this, as a team like the Jets might be. I can tell you right now, if Pettersson comes to Winnipeg, it would be one of the single biggest acquisitions ever. This would be a franchise-defining move and something that could change Winnipeg's entire fortunes from the ground up. But we'll chat about why you should or shouldn't try to attempt this in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. If you are watching Ravens versus Steelers tomorrow, could be a great game to win big with. I'm going Ravens. I hope that they finally beat the ghost of Pittsburgh games past. It's been an ugly run of form the last 8 games. I think they've all been losses, but I think firmly the Ravens are going to finally turn things around. But maybe you're watching another game and you're getting a bit of a hunch while watching. Well, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you are placing your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's all at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting about a potentially big update from around the NHL. So Elias Pettersson, could be on the trade block. And it sounds like the Vancouver Canucks are dealing with a very big internal situation with him, and it also seems to involve JT Miller. Miller obviously stepped away for a bit for what they said was personal reasons. Never clear why he was, sidelined for a good bit. Not that it's really anyone's business, but I do wonder if it is somehow related to all of this. It seems like, the front office staff has had meetings, players have had meetings, coaching staff members have had meetings. So this whole Pettersson Miller thing, whatever it is big. And I don't know if it's specifically just between them or if it's a more team-wide concern with each of these guys for different reasons. But one of the single biggest players you could ever trade for. Pettersson has been a general avalanche of offense the last few years. He has a career shooting percentage of like 16%, which is pretty insane when you think about it. This year, he's had a little bit of a dip. He's only got 26 points in 32 games, which for PD is kind of on the lower side. This is coming off of, 2 seasons where he had 102 in 2022 and 89 last season. So typically he's well over a point per game. He's had a couple of seasons where maybe he was a bit under. Those are probably his earlier seasons, but you should probably expect pretty traditional or pretty consistent, like 35, 40 goal scoring, maybe 60 assists sort of seasons, right? This is a guy who will easily put up 100 points with the right team. And I think the Jets could actually be a squad that really benefits from his overall play. Now, visually, PD doesn't always have the most attractive looking game. I think people sometimes think that he doesn't work nearly as hard as he should, or that he doesn't look as engaged. And I can kind of see that. I think with Pettersson, sometimes you have to look more at the net outcome than exactly how he does it, because the overall performance with him in his better years has been tremendous. And we're also talking about a guy who, for his whole career, is just under a point per game, like literally fractionally under. He's had 438 points in 439 games. So you just don't really get a chance to acquire players like this. unless you draft them, right? That's really the only way that you get them. And so if Pettersson is legitimately on the trade block, the Jets should probably be willing to move heaven and earth to try and make it happen. Not only would you solve your 2C question, you would also solve your first line center question. Now, there are some challenges to even thinking about a trade like this. The first big one is that Vancouver probably doesn't want to move him. He is an elite franchise level center, and those guys just don't usually get traded, not when they're 26 and signed to huge long-term deals. This particular contract is for a very long time. It carries through 2031, and I think maybe even a little bit beyond there. But, Pettersson, it's tough, right? I think he would absolutely destroy in Winnipeg, and I don't even think it's like a question. I just think the ceiling is, how many points might he get here? 100, 110? I think he could easily be a game-changing 5v5 creator for this Jets team. And he would also absolutely torch on a power play that is already torching. So really no question that he would be a huge upgrade. I guess the question is, if Vancouver wanted to trade him, and if they were willing to do so, what would you give for him? Right now, he's like an 11.6 million player. And, you'd have to basically be willing to give up Perfetti, probably Lambert, a couple of other odds and ends, maybe some draft picks. We're talking a pretty mega package of some sort. I don't even know what sort of trade package it would even take to get to this point. You're talking really no one on the board or in your system that you're not willing to try and go for. I think he could be a truly tremendous player for this team, somebody that, could really turn Winnipeg's franchise around. But if you're looking for a guy who is incredibly intelligent in terms of his two-way play, he actually has some very underrated, defensive plays and stuff, and who has an elite release and the sort of playmaking and skill that could be a game changer for this franchise, Pettersson probably would be one of the few players that I would absolutely say you just go for, right? And if Winnipeg even tries to make a big offer, you've got to swing big. I think that this is probably, oh gosh, I mean, Perfetti and a top pick and a top prospect is probably a starting point, right? You got to be willing to empty the tank for him, but that's the sort of caliber of player that the Jets would be getting, right? PD in a normal draft year is a lottery pick. That is the quality of player we're talking about. So I wonder what it would take for the Jets to bring him home. I've always been a big Pettersson fan. I think he's been a fantastic player for Vancouver. And if the Canucks really do have to trade him because of internal stuff, I would really not hesitate, right? I love Perfetti. I love Salamonson. I love Lambert. I love, any number of our prospects, Shabrikov. I wouldn't really hesitate to put anyone on the board for a Pettersson to Winnipeg play. And I'm sure a lot of you probably wouldn't feel the same way. I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are. Drop those in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. Come up with your most convincing Elias Pettersson trade package below and let me know. But for tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day every day. We will see you here next week with coverage of Winnipeg versus Minnesota and probably have some trade announcements as the holiday roster freeze is going to be lifting sometime after Christmas, and it could be pretty spicy, but we'll chat about that in a little bit. For tonight's show, that's all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.